Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the channel. I'm Brian Lusk. Thank you for joining me this evening. It's been about 4 days since I did my last stream, and boy, has it been a busy 4 days. So let's go ahead and get diving right into things and see what's going on. I see Robbie's already here. Always glad to have Robbie here. He's given me a little bit of information about what's going on over in Kharkiv. That was very thankful for. I'm looking forward to having some more conversations with him in the near future. Good guy. Let's go ahead and take a look at the real kind of the first thing that kind of caught my eye from this weekend. Calls for allowing Ukraine to use Western weapons on Russian soil have intensified with the attack into Kharkiv directly from the border areas of Russia, and with Russia also lining up additional troops in the Sumy area and floating the idea of yet another assault through Belarus into Ukraine itself. There's been a lot more conversation about this topic. Obviously, President Zelensky has asked that the Allies allow Ukraine to strike military targets on Russian soil and calling for them to eliminate the restrictions on the weapons so that they can carry out what they need to do to stop the Russians before they actually get onto Ukrainian soil. Even the EU High Representative Josep Borrell has said that enabling Ukraine to strike inside Russia is acceptable under international law because Russia's attacks on Ukraine are originating inside Russian territory. The risk of escalation, he said, I'm sure will be put on the table by some, but you have to balance the risk of escalation and the need for Ukraine to defend itself, saying that the current situation was completely asymmetric. See, the thing is that by and large, through most of this conflict, Russia has been attacking most of the time from Ukrainian territory that they have already captured. So most of the attacks come from Luhansk or Donetsk or South Kherson or parts of Zaporizhia, areas that they have a significant presence that they've captured, requiring them to take long supply lines through those territories. Obviously, there are exceptions, such as the early in the war when they marched on Kiev, but by and large, since the initial phases of the war have carried out and the initial battle lines have become more stable, Russia is primarily attacked from Crimea and these other occupied territories. This attack from Kharkiv, although to be honest, the between Sumy and Kharkiv, the two sides have been sending sabotage groups back and forth across this line for some time. The Ukrainians have been sending the Russian Legion and other similar units across that line. Of course, the Russians have no compunction about shooting at these groups at all, so they don't have any limitations in that regard. But the Russians literally are lining up their troops on the other side of the border. You can see them gathering and preparing for these assaults, and yet Ukraine hasn't been able to use like their 155 millimeter howitzers or other longer range ATACMS or other systems that would be able to reach out and destroy these units before they ever entered Ukraine. Effectively, the border regions of Russia are part of the conflict at this point, and the Russians are making it so by attacking from those regions. Of course, Vladimir Putin had I would say, almost humorous take on it, saying they should be aware of what they are playing with. During a press meeting in Uzbekistan, he said that NATO representatives, especially in Europe and elsewhere, should be aware of what they are playing with when speculating about the possibility of strikes with precision weapons on Russian territory. He emphasized that the constant escalation of the conflict, including strikes on peaceful city quarters, would lead to serious consequences. The thing is that he never expresses what those consequences should be for the Russian side when they strike peaceful city quarters like Kyiv, Odessa, Vovchansk, Kharkiv, and so many more. These cities didn't ask for this conflict. They didn't beg for the Russians to come. But he is not looking at how this looks because the West doesn't look at how this looks. They have not considered the fact in the same vein that Russia is expressing here. They've not thrown it back on Russia to justify their attack because the Russians don't have to. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they say anyway. They're just going to say whatever they want and hope something sticks. Sweden has confirmed that they have no objection to Ukraine using their weapons to strike inside Russian territory. And many other countries have also been going along as well. The U.S. says that there's currently a debate going on in the White House to strike inside Russia. Considering the nature of these situations, I actually expect at some point in time in the near future that the White House will turn loose with a set of restrictions attached, whether that's geography or specifically ensuring that they're fired at near military targets. I don't know what that restriction will be. I expect that there will be some kind of an expanded mandate for American weapons being used against Russian targets in Russia near the borders of Ukraine. But I don't know that for sure because Jake Sullivan's there, and Jake Sullivan tends to throw a wrench at everything. The Dutch have said that Ukraine must strike inside Russia. Ukraine has the right to use all means for defense and restoration of territorial integrity. Ukraine is now fighting with one hand tied behind its back. Czechia says that they will also back Ukraine striking the Russian soil with Western provided weapons. So many of especially the smaller nations, are looking at the situation and saying, I know that if I wanted to fight for my country, I'd have to fire at targets on the enemy territory, or else I wouldn't be able to defend it. Belgium, on the other hand, has said that Ukraine can only use Belgian F-16s on Ukrainian territory, nothing else. So it's a mixed bag. I'm not claiming it's all wonderful here. Latvia says that Russia's making gains due to Western restrictions on where Ukraine can strike. And again, this is just following the same theme. Sweden, already mentioned Sweden there. Let's see. Germany and Italy have opposed using Western weapons to strike Russian territory. Already talked about. I mean, I've got several duplicates of a lot of these things, so do bear with me a little bit. Whereas the men on the front lines are not happy with the restriction. How's that? We come to the edge of our borders, they hit us from their side, and we will stand quietly and be silent? It doesn't work that way. They went to war against us, not us against them. And that's from Anton Herashchenko from interviews with soldiers on the front lines. I'm going to go ahead and just paste this link right in here. Anton Herashchenko's got a lot of the personal aspect of the war in Ukraine that we don't necessarily see from other sources. So I highly recommend him if you really kind of want to see some of the more personal side of this conflict. And I reference him quite frequently, so I appreciate his heavy efforts here. Now, the next big thing that happened was in Kharkiv itself, a hypermarket. Now, this initial strike happened on the 25th, so it's been 4 days at this point. They hit, for those of us in the United States, think of this hypermarket as effectively a Home Depot or a Lowe's or some other home improvement center. Now, I've gone through multiple angles of video. I've gone through a whole bunch of things on this. I happened to, in fact, Robbie messaged me when he saw the details here and said that he's actually been in this hypermarket or whatever they call it. It's been called a hypermarket and a few other things. And he says that he's been in this facility. It's a Home Depot. It's the equivalent of it. This is not a military facility here. And the thing is that this strike seemed to have been specifically timed to happen at the busiest time of the day. In fact, the initial reports were that up to 200 people were inside this hypermarket buying construction supplies. Ironically enough, they were probably buying construction supplies to repair their homes and their businesses from the previous batch of Russian strikes. So there were families in this building. There were fathers and mothers, just individuals trying to survive in this situation. Here is video of the moment of the strike. I'm going to go ahead and get this a little bit larger here so it's a little easier to see. And I've already vetted all these videos. None of these show bodies or anything like that, but it is showing these attacks happening. Uh, Tremendous explosion. Now, some people said there was a lot of secondary explosions. Think about every Home Depot you've ever been in. They've got propane and lots of it. They've got chemicals. They've got wood. They've got those blanks that you use to fire nail gun nails. They've got everything that could go up in smoke and explode. They've got stuff in sealed canisters that are going to heat up and explode. Everything about this situation is one where it's a concentration of chemicals and a potential for catastrophic consequences when something like this happens. Here's some pictures about the situation as it was being carried out. You can see that looks just like every other home improvement store you might have seen as you've gone around doing your normal everyday thing. You might have been picking up lumber or picking up sod or buying a lawnmower. That's what they're talking about. The UN did, in fact, condemn Russia's strike against this Kharkiv hypermarket. Intentionally directing an attack against civilian infrastructure is strictly prohibited under international humanitarian law, the UN's humanitarian coordinator in Ukraine stated. Here's some of the footage from inside. I've got several of these, so bear with me. You can see a couple of guys in the plumbing department. And I did notice that the camera is shaking a little bit, and that probably indicates that it's probably mounted against something that's vibrating, maybe an air conditioning duct or something like that. But you've got a little bit of vibrate, and it looks like it's got some stabilization. But they're looking at faucets. Those are toilets. Of course, we already know the Russians have something against all toilets because they keep stealing them, and who knows what they're doing with those things, because we don't think they know how to plumb them either. But this is just a home improvement store. Here's another video of the inside of the supermarket. This one coming from the Ukrainian General Prosecutor's office. The electrical area, the bicycles area, I think this is cleaning supplies, lumber. This is what they hit with multiple bombs. I believe it's possibly KH-55, 59 bombs, in fact, missiles. There's even a man right about here who grabs his wife and covers her with his body as the ceiling parts fall down. It's tough. The death toll continued to rise, although the last number I had was in the low 20s. That's still a tremendous amount. More pictures of the consequences of this attack. You can see the shelving units that have burned down. The smoke still rising from the remaining ashes. People, the firefighters carrying out equipment and taking care of the situation as best they can in a very troublesome set of circumstances. This is the terror that Russia has brought to Ukraine. The last, let's see, this report was from late on the 25th. 50 wounded with several deaths at this point in time. You see the smoke rising from the shopping center and some more of the after effects of it. This looks like maybe a garden center here. And a more distant shot here. A video of the tour around the entire after the attack was carried out. The Anton Herashchenko talks about a particularly heart-wrenching situation where a young boy was the only survivor of his family that was here at this hypermarket. They identified the father's remains with DNA analysis just the other day. But this is from just last night. You can see there's been no letting up on the attacks by the Russian forces. During the night, Russian forces conducted a massive shelling on residential areas in the Kharkiv region. Private and multi-story residential buildings were damaged, with 3 fires breaking out at different locations. At least one person was injured. And that's the situation with the hypermarket in Kharkiv. Um, just a little bit of context here. I asked Robbie for some additional information. He said that there was nothing military near this building, just main streets and other businesses. His in-laws went there often for supplies for their home and apartment. And this is just, it's terrorism. It's vandalism and terrorism. It's making the place unlivable. And that is what Russia is trying to do. They don't have to. They want to kill everybody, but they don't have to if they can make them all leave. And that's the goal. Let's go ahead and move on to the news out of Ukraine itself. I don't got a whole lot out of Ukraine. Things have been pretty busy, but not too bad for as far as this regard goes. The Russian breakthrough in the direction of Kharkiv, which happened a little over 2 weeks ago, ended with 1 to 8 military casualties, 1 Ukrainian for 8 Russians. President Zelensky said they suffered between 2,000 and 3,000 casualties already. That was as of the 25th. Now, numbers like these are to be taken with a grain of salt. There is a war on, and propaganda is rife on both sides. However, it is likely that with the defender's advantage that these numbers are not too far off the mark. So keep that in mind. I'm just reporting the number that President Zelensky has reported publicly. Russian forces hit the Zaporizhia airport terminal with Kh-59 missiles. And this is quite the mess here. You can see before and after photos real fast here. Now, an airport at least has some military value in the traditional sense. You could land aircraft there, but I don't believe that, at least from everything I have seen, Zaporizhia International Airport is not being used for military aircraft. Never has. But, this is Russia for you. On a more positive note, an 11-year-old boy was returned home from Russian-occupied Donetsk Oblast and has been reunited with his mother that he has been separated from for 2 years. Wonderful little reintegration story from the reintegration ministry. On the opposite end of that spectrum, however, is the Energy Ministry found an explosive device at an electrical substation in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. They called police and sappers to remove the device, and no damage was carried out against infrastructure. But this indicates either partisan efforts on the Russian partisans or Russian sabotage groups successfully making it into Ukraine and potentially carrying out attacks. It's a constant battle that the Ukrainians are having to fight to keep the Russians out. Now let's move over to Russia, and I have got a lot of stuff in Russia, and I am certain I'm certain I've got duplicates here. I'll be sorting them through as I go. Vladimir Putin basically said during this press conference, "We will still do as we see fit, regardless of who will be on the territory of Ukraine." So that spells it out for you. They're going to come in and do what they want, and nobody's going to stop them if they don't want to be stopped, according to Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin also declared that if there are long-range weapons used against Russian territory, that they will make decisions on a sanitary zone. Now, understand, they've threatened a sanitary zone all the way from a few kilometers inside the Ukrainian border, all the way to a few hundred kilometers inside the Polish border. So this is a very much fluid expression here. They've threatened everybody with this one, and there is no limits on it. Now, we've mentioned recently, or at least a couple of times, that Russians have been using chemical weapons, irritants, and similar things during this war. So the Ukrainians started getting things like antidotes and gas masks and means of defense, which the Russians say is evidence that Ukraine is planning to make large-scale use of toxic substances, and that's because they are preparing defenses against toxic substances. Gee, if somebody's using toxic substances and chemical weapons against you, don't you think you'd get the stuff to protect yourself from it? Just saying. The Ukrainians are not the only ones that have to worry about partisan sabotage, because a relay cabinet in the railroad in Yaroslavl, Russia, was sabotaged, causing malfunctions at the Polyanki railway station. This is a key logistics hub for Russian military operations. There is also smoke seen rising over Novofedorivka in occupied Crimea, close to Saki Air Base. There is a partisan effort taking place, and it's been accelerating and expanding its efforts to stop, slow down, and otherwise reverse Russia's attacks by partisan efforts behind the lines. There was a drone attack on a gas station in the city of Nizhny Oryol region in Russia. The reports are that many pieces of military equipment were refueling there, and an employee of the Russian Ministry of Emergency Situations was killed, with 3 others injured. Ukraine has been attacking several of these over-the-horizon Voronezh M radar assemblies that are stationed around Russia. This one's unusual, though, because it's in Orsk-Orenburg region, at a distance of more than 1,800 kilometers from the front lines in Ukraine. That is a long one, and it sets a new record for a successful drone strike. They are still looking at what the damage is to this facility, and I have not gotten an update since yesterday when this information came out. But this is the second of their over-the-horizon radars that Ukraine has struck with their drones. And typically, these radars are used for Russia's early warning system for nuclear missiles, ICBMs, etc. Ukraine is striking at these, and I don't have a good grasp on why. If they can detect ballistic missiles, they could potentially detect things like airplanes and other missiles that might be coming their way, and this could be preparation for making sure that Russia is as blind as possible. Some people are theorizing that it could be used to put pressure on Western nations, saying, look, we can already strike Russian targets, and this is one of the ones that Russia's been saying they consider a red line. If you want us to stop attacking that, let us attack the military targets much closer to home with your Western weapons. I'm not sure I buy the pressure argument, but it's one of the ones that's being forwarded. And so keep that in mind as we go forward. Another airfield in occupied Luhansk was struck. This is originally reported as an aviation school, but there is an air defense position that was reportedly struck at the location, and likely that was the actual target. There's also been reports that there was a aviation maintenance facility at this location as well, which may also have been targeted. From the Ministry of Defense of the UK, the Defense Intelligence Update, the Russian Ministry of Defense's main political directorate issued Politruk, a new journal for political instruction for the armed forces, on the 22nd of May, 2024. This journal is intended to help political instructors in the armed forces in their political education of soldiers. Now, they went through it, and the summary is that they're drawing much more on the Stalin and Soviet eras, and this is intended to be indoctrination for their soldiers. This is the fact that they feel the necessity to do political education indicates that they are no longer feeling stable and comfortable in their armed forces and their current status on the lines. This magazine reflects the politicized use of history that has become a prominent feature of Russian educational policy in recent years, particularly since the invasion of Ukraine, and continues to peddle the false narratives that Russia has been using to influence its military personnel and population more generally. Now, I did mention earlier that there was some things being floated about potentially the Russians launching a new operation from the Belarus front. Kiev believes that's psychological operations, and so they have put out the warning that this may be something that they're putting out there just to try and cause more chaos on the front lines. But then again, we've also seen helicopters and things like that being moved into Belarus as well. Not seen any big troop movements into Belarus, though. That's what I think is going to be the big indicator. Explosions and fire reported near an aircraft repair plant in occupied Luhansk. Okay, this is the aviation school. Sorry, this is duplicate. That's a picture of what it looked like, though. Russia has proposed that they're to remove the Taliban from their list of terrorist organizations. And that's because they believe they can work with the Taliban now. Congratulations, Russia. You're working with terrorist organizations. Already talked about that. Keep moving. Now, this one, I think, needs some context here. Russian shell production is 3 times greater than that of Ukraine's allies. Now, I've got, I think, several articles on this I might have scattered throughout, and I'll discuss different aspects here. But overall, what they're saying is that Russia can produce 3 times more of their 152 millimeter shells than the West can of their 155 millimeter shells, and they're doing it for around $1,000 per round. Now, with 4.5 million of these 152 millimeter shells. Now, I'm going to put a little context on this now. Other sources have said that this 4.5 million is not 152 millimeter shells. That is instead all shells. Whereas the numbers for the West that are being reported, 1.3 million, are only for 155. I've not been able to confirm that outright, but I've got conflicting information, and I want you to know that as I continue. This idea, though, is that Russia can produce 3 times the shells. The thing is that the Ukrainians don't need to match Russia's shell output to have much greater effectiveness, because American and Western shells are much better quality. And yes, I know that sounds like propaganda, but it's actually true. The equipment's better. It's not shot out. It's more accurate, and it has a greater opportunity to put effect on target. They've got better targeting systems, which can mean a first-time hit instead of having to walk shells in. I actually saw a video of Russians having to walk their artillery onto target. You'd see 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4, and then the 5th one hit on target. If they're having to use 5 shells to put it on target, then that means their 3-to-1 advantage is actually about a 1-to-2 disadvantage when you really start doing the numbers. Now, President Zelensky did report that Russia's forming another grouping of forces near Ukraine's northern border. This has been reported as Sumy in several different aspects here. So President Zelensky put it in a specific context of, this is not the actions of somebody who wants peace. Russian intelligence is recruiting petty criminals on Telegram for sabotage in European capitals. There's been a series of, shall we say, shady events happening in various parts of Europe. There have been, shall we say, explosive and damaging events at artillery plants, businesses, public locations, government facilities that are being, shall we say, directed. The attention has been directed towards Russia. So they know that Russia's already in the middle of this. But now Russia's basically saying, hey, look, if you're a petty criminal in these countries, we don't even have to put one of our resources there. You go commit this on our behalf, and here's money to do so. This one caught my attention, though. Russia is now using the newest Iranian glide bombs on their drones. This indicates that Iran is more heavily involved in Russia's military capabilities than Russia would like to let on. But this has been identified as the latest model that Iran produces. Once again, in the realm of Russia saying everything that they're planning to do, Russia is claiming that NATO is training for a nuclear strike on Russian territory. And to be honest, this is actually true, in the sense of They're preparing for a retaliatory strike if Russia's dumb enough to launch a nuclear weapon. After Russia's recent nuclear weapons drills, the head of the FSB border service blamed NATO in an interview with RIA Novosti for preparing to attack Russia. No. This will be a counterstrike, not an attack, and they know it. But welcome to propaganda. Already talked about that. This is the Orenburg-Voronezh radar. Okay, this is some of the damage report here. They're saying they've got some strikes in these areas. I don't know what this represents, except for to state that it's clear they hit in the area of the radar system. It doesn't look like they directly impacted the radar array itself. From the design and what I understand of the layout, the radar itself being right here, but they struck a lot of ancillary facilities in the area. Now, this on Astra was put up as an advertisement for another channel, but they point something out that I want to kind of talk about for a moment. Should we expect, as in the Russians, a new mobilization? And with Putin preparing for a protracted war and purges among their generals, that even if they manage to get their leadership together, they still need people to go to war. But the Russians don't want to. They're already raising payments to soldiers to, as they call it, fabulous amounts. But there are fewer and fewer people who are willing to go and die. Sources close to the Russian Defense Ministry report that a new mobilization will take place this year because the dwindling influx of volunteers does not allow large offensives to be carried out, and without successes on the battlefield, people's fatigue from the war is growing. The one thing I think we sort of don't see in the West, especially with all the useful patsies that Russia has managed to pull into their orbit, the one thing we don't actually see in the West is the effects of stationary front lines on Russia. You see, if you look at Kharkiv, and we'll talk about this in a bit, the lines in Kharkiv itself have effectively not moved for about a week now. There have been little changes, but no big ones. There's not been the initial attack. So Russians look at that and they're going, oh, so you're not making progress and you're losing a bunch of people and now you need to mobilize. Why would I want to go there? Because you're not making the impressive gains that you reported early in this war. Now, I think I've got another one on this one, but I want to talk about this for just a moment here. 2 more aerial bombs were dropped by Russian planes on the Belgorod region within 24 hours, with an unidentified aerial bomb on May 27th in Pristin-Shebekinsky district, and another one in the village of Novonkoye in Ivanivsky district, with no injuries for either one. But at this point in time, it's starting to look like Russia is very much capable of bombing Belgorod on their own without necessarily needing a whole lot of effort on the part of Ukraine to do so. And the total is 9 aerial bombs since over the region on May 24th and 25th. In just 2 days, they dropped 9 of these aerial bombs on Belgorod region. This one I'm sharing because it just shows that Russia's infrastructure is beginning to collapse from neglect and not paying attention. This one was because of the flooding. They say that this bridge collapsed due to melting water and flooding, and the supports in the middle collapsed both spans. We also see a lot of reports of, like, for instance, the ship over in Baltimore that hit a bridge and knocked it down. That was a particularly, shall we say, problematic design that caused that situation. But it's not, there's more than that going on. Here in Rostov-on-Don, a dry cargo ship crashed into the span of a railway bridge. This is a non-navigable bridge span due to a steering failure with no casualties, and the bridge is still operating as usual. But we don't see the reports from Russia of these things happening that much. We see them when they happen in our backyard, of course. But this is there's more going on here. In Taganrog, an aircraft repair plant was allegedly hit, according to Crimean Wind Monitoring Group, with fires recorded in the area of the 325th Aircraft Repair Plant, which does IL-76s. And there are outbreaks located in the area of the runway. There's also another one, the Beriev plant, which has already come under attack before. So it's clear there is a regular desire to hit this area by Ukrainians. This is coming back to the over the horizon radar, and this is theorizing, and I'm going to put it that way for sure. Crimean Wind theorizes that this could be evidence that Ukrainian drones. This could also indicate that Ukrainian drones flying such long distance could be that they're working out the routes to strike Russia with long range missiles already. These particular facilities, for the relevant facilities and missiles, I don't think I quite buy that, but it's an interesting thought process, and I just wanted to share. There was a drone shot down and fell, I should say, near the Gelendzhik. And the thing that kind of caught my eye is that this is a location where one of Vladimir Putin's palaces are. Could it have been the target of a drone strike? I think not. I think it's much more likely they were going for something else in the area, or maybe wandering around looking for some ships to hit or something like that. But interesting to keep an eye on. Russia's getting very hot under the collar to try and recruit Africans to fight on their behalf, including producing propaganda in other languages, including in this case English, that they can take to African areas, and advertising their special unit for foreigners with big salaries and all this kind of thing. They're pulling out all the stops to recruit. And Russia has begun deploying stationary observation aerostats on the eastern border of Finland. That's right, that's a balloon. I mentioned this the other day, that there were some balloons that were being looked at for some of the other nations to watch their borders as well with Russia. So it looks like everybody's putting balloons in the air to monitor what they're doing. This is to prevent illegal immigration towards Finland. Yeah. Let's move on to the international front for a little bit. We already discussed the situation on striking targets in Russia. Some of the people talking about using those weapons for it. This is some what I consider bad news, at least. The Swedish Ministry of Defense have temporarily suspended plans to send Gripen aircraft to Ukraine in order to allow the introduction of F-16 aircraft. Now, they report that there were several nations that approached them and asked them to hold off. This feels weird, and I don't have a good context for it just yet. So I am reporting it as the fact that it is, and that those Gripen potential deliveries have been suspended. I want to gather more information. So if you see a source that talks about this, absolutely send it my way. My email address is brianlusk@zohomail.com. So please absolutely send it my way so I can review and try and get some more information on this. There is a new bilateral agreement on cooperation and security and long-term support between Belgium and Ukraine that'll allocate at least 977 million euros for military aid to Ukraine. That's going to be very helpful for Ukrainian armed forces. Now, this all comes from the Institute for the Study of War. Great source. Love them. They do great analysis on this stuff. This is from May 27th, 1 in the afternoon. The NATO Parliamentary Assembly called on member states to lift their prohibitions against Ukraine using Western-provided weapons to strike within the Russian territory. Spain signed a 10-year bilateral security agreement with Ukraine. Ukrainian forces continue to target Russian long-range early warning radar systems and oil and gas infrastructure. So they don't give a good analysis on exactly why they think this is, but they are reporting that long-range strike, and I'm looking forward to seeing their analysis on the effects of this in the end. President Putin reportedly told German Chancellor Olaf Scholz before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine that Ukraine is not an independent state and that Russia can unilaterally and forcibly change Ukraine's borders. This is where I start looking sideways at Olaf Scholz for a bit. It feels like he was a little too buddy-buddy with Vladimir Putin. And I want to put my finger on why. Because Germany has been one of the big supporters of Ukraine since early in the war. And having this type of information about Olaf Scholz come out really concerns me from a political perspective. Now, that said, before the full-scale invasion, this could be just normal diplomatic back channel talk, as always. But why didn't he say anything before the invasion? That was what really worries me. According to sources, the Alabuga factory in Russia can produce up to 6,000 Shahed-type drones per year. They're already ahead of this production schedule with 4,500 supplied. They've brought technicians in from Africa. They've got their staff. They've been kicking out foreigners for a while now. Now they're bringing in foreigners to work on their drones. So they're even training their drone operators in Syria with IRGC instructors, and they're just, Russia needs to figure out what they're doing and let the rest of us know. Be consistent about something. This is information right here that should surprise nobody. Just basically, Britain used parts of its funds to support Ukraine by buying Soviet equipment from third countries. Now, the fun part about buying Soviet equipment and sending it to Ukraine is, number one, they're probably getting it from some of Russia's allies. So they don't say who. But number two, if it's Russian made, there's no ties to Britain. So there's no restrictions. It's not Western hardware. If they fire it at Russia's territory, it looks just like any other Russian whatever fired at Russia's territory. So I thought that was fun. According to Bild, there are serious talks about NATO countries deploying instructors in Ukraine, as well as covering the western part of Ukraine with NATO air defense. And I do believe there are these conversations taking place. The thing is, there have been direct denials that these discussions have taken place, which usually means those discussions are actually taking place. So we already know that a couple of countries have offered instructors to go into Ukraine, and there have been some serious discussion of using Western air defense systems to cover the western parts of Ukraine, which would free up Ukraine's air defenses to move farther forward. On the other end of the spectrum here, Indian refineries are now willing to purchase Russian oil in rubles. That's specifically the Indian Reliance Industries, which has reached a one-year agreement with Russia's state-controlled oil company Rosneft to purchase oil in rubles. They're looking at buying about 3 million barrels of oil a month. And this kind of indicates that there could be some weakness in what they call the petrodollar. This would be one of the goals of Russia, to unseat the petrodollar and therefore make it so that America no longer has any kind of control over exactly how that works. In some ways, Russia's plans are being carried out. Macron said that Ukraine must be allowed to strike bases on Russian territory from which missiles are fired. And Macron's been getting really bellicose yet again and has talked about sending instructors to Ukraine as well. There was Sersky kind of said, yes, they're gonna, and then he kind of withdrew that comment. So we might see French instructors on the ground pretty soon here. The Estonian defense minister has called for expanding the capacity of the Western training programs from 60,000 to 100,000 personnel. They're going to need even more, so absolutely expand those programs. The Swiss, on the other hand, have been taking tougher action against spies ahead of the upcoming Ukrainian peace summit. This seems to be intended to curb Russian intelligence activities in the country beforehand. And the Russians have been pretty aggressive right now. Talked about that already. Sweden announced a new energy package worth around $60 million. No details on what it's expected beyond being an energy package. Then there's President Biden. Now, there's been a variety of reports on this one. The last I heard was that Biden would not be attending the Ukraine Peace Summit over in Switzerland. And President Zelensky states that if that happens, then Vladimir Putin will applaud. Sending Biden would certainly up the prestige of the event and make it more likely that things would happen. And by not going, it also degrades the event and indicates that it would not make as big a difference. Poland is saying they're not ruling out sending their own troops to Ukraine, and that's not just in the training role. They said, we should not rule out any option. Let Vladimir Putin guess what we will do. I love it. That's the strategic ambiguity that we should be giving Russia all the time. The Netherlands says they want to deliver a Patriot air defense system in cooperation with other countries. I don't think they have one to spare, but I think they're willing to pony up some bucks and maybe support it if they can get one sent their way. In fact, it says here they've identified some partners who contribute parts and ammunition and asked them to join their initiative to do so. Hungary's been blocking support to Ukraine everywhere they can yet again, and this is no surprise. I'm not even going to stick around with this one. They're the constant spoiler in the situation there. Belgium is providing 30 F-16s, the first expected to arrive this year, but the rest of them will be dribbled in until 2028. So it's not going to be an immediate like 30 fighters all at once, but you can see a couple here, a couple there dribbling in. Poland has begun to restrict the movements of Russian diplomats, and of course, Moscow's not happy with that. But why would we let those diplomats have free reign in our country anyway? Just saying. Germany will provide another 60 million euros in humanitarian assistance. That's meant to cover like the Russian terror attacks, try and cover the needs of the civilian population, not just the military. Keep moving on. Now, this article from the Kiev Post is pretty good. I'm just going to link to the Telegram announcement for it here. They talk about why Europe is not juicing up a whole lot of shell production like you would expect. And that's a couple of reasons. Main one is that they let their defense industrial base kind of run fallow. So they shut down plants and shut down production lines. And people retired, and the people that know how to do it aren't there anymore, have passed on. So they don't have the running facilities to produce at the level that they expected. They're going to have to retool and refurbish old factories, which will take time. But this is a big wake-up call. If European nations haven't figured it out by now, they're never going to figure it out. That if they can't produce enough weapons to keep Ukraine in the fight, they can't produce enough weapons to keep themselves in the fight either. This one from Peter Erik Schultz is a marine biologist and toxic hunter from the Norwegian Society for the Conservation of Nature. Nothing to see here, he says, just a perfectly normal Russian bottom trawling back and forth repeatedly just on top of the main fiber optic internet cable between Svalbard and Norwegian mainland. You can see this just moving back and forth right here, right across that cable. I wonder what they might be doing. We know it's not, and we know it's up to no good. Now, I'm going to link you this one as well. This is War Gonzo. They are strong Russian supporters here, talking about the shortage of explosives that's preventing them from arming in Ukraine. They do provide some additional context, such as that Europe has had to go to Russia to get their gunpowder and things like that, and now they don't have that line there. However, just be advised that they do look at things from Russia's perspective. So be prepared to see him call the Ukrainians Nazis and things like that. But it's another perspective on the reason why the number of shells has not been robust from European nations. And I often look at Russian sources for this very reason, because they'll, even though they are the enemy, quote, 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 they also will dig in at times, like War Gonzo, and actually find some of the details that are underneath the reasons why. And if I can put that out there so that people can solve that, all to the good for Ukraine. Let's move over to the front lines, and things are a bit scattered today. I've got a variety of odds and ends, but it won't take that long. We already know that there's been no significant change for about a week over in the Kharkiv region. Lots of fighting. Don't ever get me wrong whenever I say that. There are plenty of people fighting and dying in these areas, but the Russians have not taken any significant territory beyond maybe some of this area north of the river in Volchansk, which has been mostly ceded to the Russians at this point. There are still raids going on from south of the river into the northern part of Volchansk, but the control is effectively both gray zone and Russian. There was a couple of minor changes. Let me go grab those. And I do mean minor because they basically just pop over like small areas like this. This makes it look huge, but when you put it into perspective, it's a teeny tiny little advance in the line on open territory. Same thing with this one. It's a little chunk near Umansk, and it's just open territory. And Netalova. Now, you'll note that all of these are in the east of Ukraine, and none of them are in the Volchansk area or in Kharkiv area. That's because Russia, at least from what I'm gathering at this point, is that Russia was hoping that the attack into Kharkiv would draw enough Ukrainian forces up that area that they could make some real pushes in the east, maybe gain in Donetsk and Luhansk, and yet it didn't pay off for them in the end. As the Institute for the Study of War states, Ukrainian and Russian sources stated that Ukrainian forces are increasingly contesting the tactical initiative in northern Kharkiv and characterized Russian operations in the area as defensive. Of course, they put a couple of caveats on that, but basically that's what it is. The Russians are on the back foot, or at least for the moment, in Kharkiv. So the Ukrainians are pushing them back ever so slowly. That does not make it easy for the people in the area. There are reports that they're getting additional sources concentrated in this area in western Belgorod, near the border with Ukraine, hoping to expand the Russian foothold in this international border area. Again, this is the whole situation here. Russia wants to fix as many troops up there so they can do more advances in the east overall. Pardon me for just 1 second. All right, apologize for that. In Karashinka, occupied left bank, Russians were visited by HIMARS. Reportedly, a base with equipment was struck, which is now burning. Now, we haven't talked much about the situation over here on the West Bank much. We do mention it occasionally. And the interesting thing, and I'm going to kind of give you a lot of high-level summary here, there was a strike into Kozachi Laheri. I think I've got a link on that later. That took out a Russian facility there. But there's not much in Krinky left to defend. So Ukrainian forces didn't give up their beachhead. They're moving it to Kozachi Laheri, as in they're moving to a new place with actually defendable territory after the Russians have flattened everything. That means that we should expect to see Russians retake this area because the Ukrainians have moved farther this direction. But it's there's no change as far as the amount of territory held overall. There's teeny tiny little slivers either way on this one. There's been other attacks in the area on the left bank. We'll kind of talk about a few of those as we go. A second Russian hideout on the left bank, or the south side of the river, was also destroyed. This one was the one in Kozachi Laheri I was talking about. And you can see Russians jumping into this looks like a house. And so, of course, the Ukrainians identified it and dropped some hardware right into that area. In particular, a drone. Poof. So that took care of some of the Russians in that area. They kept moving around and they kept dealing with this hideout. There were reports that this is kind of a couple of days ago. This is from Krasnohorivka, where there was a small advance by Russian forces. There's Russians are still having trouble making significant gains, even though it's unlikely Ukraine has very many units left in Krasnohorivka. In fact, there were reports I saw from an unofficial source that the Ukrainians were back into Krasnohorivka and kicking Russians out of various parts of it, and so this area is kind of fluid. Ivanivka, the Russian forces claim to have taken control, and they have released footage showing that they've got the flag up there, and they believe that it's actually occupied. So again, relatively small advances, but still significant. Another one on the left bank, a checkpoint that was destroyed by the Ukrainian forces. So again, there seems to be a lot more targeting of items in the on the Dnipro River bank. And it makes me, and I'm going to speculate for a moment. This is pure speculation. I have no line into the defense, their defense department equivalent, Ministry of Defense. But it looks like they're trying to maybe cause more trouble for Russia over there, kind of do the opposite of what the Russians are doing in Kharkiv and expand their footprint on the left bank of the Dnieper River to make Russia have to fix more of their troops down there on the Dnieper River. See, Krasnohorivka, small gains again. I already mentioned that earlier. Near Chasiv Yar, I'm pointing this out. It's got another repelled attack. There have been no significant changes near Chasiv Yar in several days. And that's not because the Russians haven't been trying. They've been trying repeatedly to assault the Chasiv Yar. The Ukrainians appear to have them stopped, at least on the ability to take additional significant territory in Chasiv Yar. And this is one of their major goals for this area of their offensive. There is a report that the Russians managed to advance into Bilohorivka, the center thereof, with several forward checkpoints lost. And there is a lot of fierce fighting going in Bilohorivka. So not looking good for Ukraine there. We'll be watching. Like I said, I've got some duplicates here, so let me just bip on through. The Ministry of Defense of the UK did give their report on what things look like in Vovchansk. Russian forces are continuing to attack the town of Vovchansk as part of their offensive into northern Kharkiv, which began on the 10th of May. The town remains contested, with the defending Ukrainian forces repelling the majority of Russian assaults. Within the village of Burevvatka, west-southwest of Vovchansk, likely under their control, Russian forces are attempting to achieve physical control of the nearby crossing over the Seversky Donets River, thereby threatening the flank and rear of defending Ukrainian forces in Vovchansk itself. On the Luhansk axis, Russian forces continue to launch attacks in the direction of the village of Lipsy, but have made no significant progress, according to the Ukrainian General Staff. And, of course, Vladimir Putin talked about his buffer zone, which is what they talk about here. The interesting thing is, once again, that we're seeing a lot of people reporting the same basic information from various perspectives. Everybody likes to spin it in their own way to make it look the best for them. But the overall takeaway is that the lines of control have not significantly changed for going on a week now. So I wouldn't say things are settling so much as the tough situations are being dealt with one by one as they go. The General Staff of Ukraine reported that Russian troop activity increased in the Kupiansk direction, and that increase could be intending to try and divert more attention away from other areas where Russia's trying to make advances. Now, they've been trying to get to Kupiansk for a while. It wouldn't surprise me if they're hoping to make a big push there. I don't necessarily know that they can make a big difference at this point in time. I mentioned this earlier about the Russians having to walk their There's shots in, and you can see having multiple shots hitting this area right here. They're walking them in to try and figure things out and get everything lined up to get these positions hit. But the thing is that even though they obliterated this Ukrainian position, when the Russians actually came to try and walk into the positions thinking that they had killed all the Ukrainians busted out, shell-shocked at everything, didn't run away, didn't surrender, got up and assaulted the attacking Russian forces. They withstood a high density of enemy strikes here, and even though they know they're not going to get air support at this particular moment, they did everything they could to prevent the Russians from taking this position. And I believe they were successful. Ukraine control map also reports no significant changes in a while. They actually put that they have pulled the Russian presence back a little bit in Volchansk, which is interesting. That would indicate that the Russians aren't able to hold even the areas in Volchansk that are up to the river, the ones that initially looked like they were going to be ceded control of by the Ukrainians, and just allow the Russians to take them. It appears that they're being beat back in that area. In fact, I've seen several reports that Ukrainians have been pulling off small-scale counterattacks and pushing the Russians back in various spots. Now, I'm not worried about the video per se, but this is a couple of Russian propagandists who went to kind of film things in the area of Volchansk. And while they were there, they nearly lost their lives to a mine explosion. However, one of their colleagues did receive a leg injury after their buggy hit a mine placed by Ukrainian drones. They're trying to be all sneaky and get into these war zones and get their propaganda footage. And yet they're finding they're being targeted as well because they're in military garb. They look just like any other soldier on the battlefield. And they're often participants in this war. And War Gonzo, I'm just going to put it up here. You can scan it if you'd like. But the end result, even though he phrases it in the most positive way for Russia, is there's no significant changes. Calls some of the areas where they did move forward as tactical successes. No changes, however, in the overall lines of control. I've also noticed that Verbova and Robotna have disappeared out of the news again, even on the Russian side. So that tells me that things have stabilized once more there. And that's the situation on the front lines. That's everything that's going on. It's just a lot of stuff that's been happening over the last 4 days. Now, I got a few other news items and some extras that I would absolutely love for you to stick around for. Some of them are related to the Ukraine war. Some of them are not. So let's go ahead and dive right on into them. If you are just wanting to see what was going on the front lines, now's a good time for you to hop on out of here. But I would love for you to stay for just a few more minutes. And if you are about to bail, hit me with that old thumbs up, just so that YouTube knows that I'm doing a pretty good job representing the news here. From Tindar, and I've seen this from multiple other sources as well, a U.S. colonel of the Special Forces discovered a trespasser with a telescopic camera on his property. After an altercation, the elite U.S. soldier was forced to kill the intruder. It turned out that the intruder is a Russian national of Chechen ethnicity and that he was illegally in the United States. The incident occurred not far from Fort Liberty, formerly Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Law enforcement agencies suspect a spy operation. That's here in the U.S. A Russian spy with a camera near a military base wandered onto the property of a special forces colonel. Guarantee it wasn't wandered on. It was very much deliberate. And this man, Ramzan Daryev, who they say is from Chicago, Illinois, was there doing spying. Russia's at war with us. We should recognize this. There is also an attempt to penetrate the Marine Corps base at Quantico. They came in, I believe it was a box truck, and I think they tried to run the checkpoint. And when they were stopped there, the two men who are Jordanian nationals claimed that they were employees of Amazon. But Amazon says they're not our employees. So, what were these two Jordanians doing trying to access one of the nation's most secure military bases? We've got enemies, people. Let's keep that in mind. Moving over to Georgia, not the state, but the country. Georgia's parliament did overrule President Salome Zurabichvili's veto of the controversial foreign agents law, moving that legislation closer to its likely enactment. We already predicted this would happen, so this was not unexpected. But the EU said that you get this through and we're going to reconsider our relationship with Georgia and could close off further pathways to integration. I believe this threat is effectively toothless, but we'll see. Now, as far as the other news section here, this delves into politics for just a few moments in the U.S. This is an interview with American Republican Representative Thomas Massie, generally considered one of the conservative voices, definitely a MAGA Republican for those who are familiar with the term. He was at the Libertarian National Convention where Sputnik News, which is a Russian state-run organization, interviewed him. And I went and I thought, well, he was at a Libertarian Party thing. And so he was probably just interviewed by a journalist. Well, I got looking, and Massie is all over Sputnik News. So even if he is not himself working for Russia, which I'm not saying he is at all, he is obviously taking the positions that are very supportive of the Russian narrative. In this case, he's saying, stop sending money to Ukraine and try to negotiate peace. Exactly the message coming out of the Kremlin. So there are reasons why I am concerned about many of the politicians in the United States these days, and I am very careful about who gets my vote and my endorsement. Moving on to the interesting extras. Now, some of these are just fun, so let's sit back, relax, and enjoy for just a minute. And I'm going to zoom this in a little bit. Picture of Kiev, 996. Desetina Church. Moscow in 996. An empty forest. Kiev in 1011, St. Sophia's Cathedral. Kiev in 1070, Vitabuchi Monastery. But Moscow in those years was nothing but an empty forest. And in 1108, St. Michael's Golden Domed Monastery. Whereas Moscow was still nothing but an empty forest. So who is the legacy? Who has the legacy here? I don't think we can say Moscow does. Going back to World War II, and they hate it when we point this out. In fact, Russia's been trying to erase this from their history books. When the Germans were just 15 miles from Moscow, the U.S. sent 4.5 million tons of food. So to keep the Russians from starving to death, because they had lost nearly 20 million tons of grain due to spring frosts. That was 14% of their anticipated annual harvest. We also sent 427,000 trucks, 6,000 combat vehicles, 7,000 tanks, 11,000 aircraft, 2,000 ambulances, 35,000 motorcycles, 2,000 locomotives, 11,000 train cars, for the 4.5 million tons of food, 53% of U.S. ammo production, and 57.8% of Soviet aviation fuel, plus several complete factories that the U.S. sent to Russia as Lend-Lease so that they could fight against the Germans. They like to celebrate their big victory. And I absolutely give Russia the credit they deserve for putting bodies into that gap. I also recognize that Russia was a partner to Germany early in the war. I recognize that Russia is not our partner today. But while Russia was putting bodies in the gap, we were putting bullets in their guns and food in their mouths. This is a bit of, I'm not sure if you could call this street art per se. Artist Filipinzo created his new work in the Ukrainian-controlled part of the Donetsk region. I went to Donbass, which some Russians consider theirs due to mental disability, he says. I opened the season with a new job. Bye-bye, or sweet dream of the occupier. There's a close-up of that. You can see the Russian Z on several graves. Thought that was an interesting little aside. Wounded Ukrainians are undergoing rehabilitation in the Netherlands, but they're not being idle at the same time. They're actually assembling drones as they do so. And this is a great work for them to make use of their hands, keep them busy. They may have an artificial leg, but they can learn how to do this electronics work while they're getting the rehabilitation they need to return return to service if they can, or return to civilian life. These are wild roe deer in the minefields of the Kherson region. You can see at various points, in fact, let me back this up. Those circles right there that get highlighted in red, those are mines. Hi, Jerry. Glad to have you here. You're late. I'm just at the very end here. But there's a lot of good stuff. This has been a busy weekend. And the deer are just walking through these areas. They are just as subject to these mines as any other. But they're just going to have to live the best they can. Just shows that Russia is a danger to everybody. This is out of Nikopol. A Russian strike lit this building on fire, but the firefighters managed to save the dog and carry him away from this raging inferno right here. And I'm going to end off with this cute little video. And as this video runs, I'll talk because you can see what's going on. This is a mama duck, and you can see we've got looks like a firefighter who is prying up not a vent, but a drain. You see, mama duck had quite a few more ducklings. Still has one with her, but there's a whole lot more ducklings she's supposed to be finding here. So these firefighters went and opened up the drain and started finding the ducklings inside the drain. And they'd bring them out and they would give them to the mama duck, who sat nearby, just right inside the edge of the grass. There's no other context than the wonderful desire to help these little animals and the very troublesome time there is. And I want to just say that I appreciate all of you being here for these news rundowns. It's going to be a little bit tougher moving forward. I'm working full time once again, not in producing videos, so I'm doing all of this in a little bit of my extra time. So I might be reducing to about 3 times a week, but I'm going to try and keep up a decent rate here so that you can keep the most current information that I can get to you available. Overall, though, I want you to know that I appreciate you being here. All of you, including Robbie, Jerry, and Lucille. Thank you. And if you have any questions for me, absolutely pipe up. Let me know. We'll try and get answers for you. But in the meantime, thank you for joining me. Hit me that thumbs up if you enjoyed today's video. You have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.